Trump saw how successful, the Iron Dome is.
That's the
For the Israelis, and said, hey, give me one of those, but do it in space.
Welcome, everybody. This is Buck Jarvis with the Wealth Formula Podcast, coming to you from Montecito, California. And today, before we begin, I want to remind you that there is a website associated with this podcast. It's wealthformula.com. It's where you go for the resources that you may want to have at your disposal, including access to various lists, getting on various lists, such as our accredited investor group. If you're an accredited investor, make sure you go there and sign up, get onboarded so that you can see potential deal flow that you would otherwise not see, because they're not things that you're going to see in general solicitation. They are reserved for the club. Anyway, let's talk today a little bit about space. Okay, so recently I made the case that it's not too late to buy Bitcoin, even after it crossed $100,000 mark. Why? Well, because the nature of the opportunity has changed. When governments and institutions start stockpiling a finite asset, you're no longer just betting on price. You're watching a new system take shape. And interestingly, a very similar story is unfolding not in financial markets, but in orbit. You're like, why are you talking about this, Buck? Because that's my job here. My job here is to try to open up your financial horizons and try to see, what's not directly in front of you, what other people aren't all talking about. But listen, for the most of the last century, space was strictly the domain of governments, NASA, the Department of Defense, the Russian and Chinese space agencies. These were the only players, right? The real players. Private capital didn't have much of a role at all. And of course, that changed with our boy, Elon. That changed with SpaceX. SpaceX, I got to tell you, man, I have to tell you, Dave, a lot of people hate Elon. I think he's incredible. SpaceX, one of his creations, didn't just innovate. It obliterated the cost structure. So in 2010, it cost about $50,000 to launch a kilogram of anything you wanted into orbit. Today, thanks to the reusable Falcon 9, that cost has fallen to under $2,000. Yes, it has gone from $50,000 to $2,000. And Starship could bring it below $500. Now, these aren't obviously just marginal gains. These are cost reductions that unlock entirely new industries. Now, we're now seeing an explosion of opportunity because of that. We're seeing satellite internet that connects the most remote parts of the globe, smartphones that communicate directly with orbiting satellites, and AI-enhanced imaging tools that monitor everything from crop health to military activity in real time. By the way, I do but I do wonder what's going to happen with some of these cell phone companies that rely on these contracts when these, when these satellites become more of a thing. I anticipate that they're probably going to be contracting with those satellites, but a lot of that stuff should ultimately be free, I think. Who knows how it's going to work, but anyway, something to keep an eye on. It's an evolving industry, and I'm sure some of the cell phone companies will be smart and not be, like some of the photography film companies of the past that resisted changes to digital photography. But getting back to this whole space thing, right? So last year alone, space startups raised nearly $13 billion in private investment, even in a tighter funding environment that is currently the case across the board. And Morgan Stanley projects the space economy could surpass $1 trillion by 2040, and that's double of its current size, if you're curious. Perhaps most surprising of all, over 3/4 of global space revenue today comes from commercial activity, not government programs. So the bottom line, it's not science fiction, it's infrastructure, it's logistics, it's telecom, and most importantly to you, it's investable. And that's why we're going to talk about it on this week's episode of Wealth Formula Podcast right after these messages.
Wealth formula banking is an ingenious concept powered by whole life insurance. But instead of acting just as a safety net, the strategy supercharges your investments. First, you create a personal financial reservoir that grows at a compounding interest rate, much higher than any bank savings account. As your money accumulates, you borrow from your own bank to invest in other cash-flowing investments. Here's the key. Even though you've borrowed money at a simple interest rate, your insurance company keeps paying you compound interest on that money, even though you've borrowed it. Net result, you make money in two places at the same time. That's why your investments get supercharged. This isn't a new technique. It's a refined strategy used by some of the wealthiest families in history, and it uses century-old, rock-solid insurance companies as its backbone. Turbocharge your investments. Visit wealthformulabanking.com. Again, that's wealthformulabanking.com.
Welcome back to the show, everyone. Today, my guest on Wealth Formula Podcast is Chris Quilty. Chris has made his name as a twice recognized Wall Street Journal Best on the Street analyst before turning his focus to space. He began covering the sector in the mid-2000s and then went on to co-found Quilty Space, now a go-to research and advisory firm in the industry. Today, he advises major players across the country, I guess not only the country, maybe even the world, I don't know. Maybe even in space?
No, there's nobody out there yet. Not yet.
Welcome to the show. How are you?
Doing good. Thanks for the kind intro.
Yeah, of course. This is terra unknown for us as well here. So let's talk a little bit about this. I guess, obviously you made this move at some point into the space sector. What drove that?
Yeah, misfortune. That's
why.
Okay.
Yeah. Misfortune.
So,
okay, tell us all about
it. So I was a sell-side analyst working for Raymond James, writing on small cap defense stocks. And then post 9/11, every single company I wrote research on got acquired. So the research director's like, what are you going to do here? And I kind of looked in the close adjacency to all this stuff in defense is the satellite industry, right? Space technology is a dual use technology with defense, and had always been driven by and attached to all these things defense. So I guess I was too stupid at the time to realize there was a reason why nobody on Wall Street was writing on the industry, because it had just gone bankrupt in the last big space bubble in the 1990s that people forget about, with Teledesic, which was backed by Bill Gates and Craig McCaw and others, and the Iridium constellation, which was the biggest bankruptcy in history at the time. So I dropped into this industry in the mid-2000s. It was really sleepy, not much going on. Everything was driven by government and defense. Nothing was changing, and most notably, the cost of launch hadn't changed since the dawn of the space age. Even through the Apollo program and whatnot, it still costs you $10,000 to $20,000 a kilogram to put something in space. And then we all know the answer, right? What happened to change everything was SpaceX. Yeah. And they came in the market and they did everything different from how it was done before. They bought an old 747 factory there in Hawthorne, from Northrop. And instead of hiring away experienced engineers from Boeing, they hired kids right out of college who didn't know what they didn't know, and told them, take first principles. And, we all know the story, right? They vertically integrated, they lowered launch costs. And now what we've seen happen over the past 5 to 10 years, really, this entirely new space economy that's emerging, it's all been driven by these lower launch costs, which are now down by one order of magnitude. And if that crazy Starship rocket, the one you see getting caught with the chopsticks, if that thing works, we're getting down to hundreds of dollars per kilogram to launch things in space. And then maybe, their claims, if they're going to build 1,000 Starships to send people at 100 a piece to Mars, not anybody I know or my family, but apparently there's a market for that. That's where they're going with this.
Yeah. Actually, I listened to an interview with Elon on Joe Rogan not long ago when he was talking about sort of this very thing about, not only being able to grab those rockets so that they don't have to rebuild them, but also things like, the damage that's done to various parts of these vessels as they re-enter the atmosphere and the heat that damages them. There are still parts of these things that don't survive the mission, and that if you get those things to survive the mission, he was talking about how the cost of sending things into space goes down potentially, like an order of 1,000 or 10,000 or something like that, which is pretty incredible. But so when you look at this from a obviously coming from a background of not knowing anything about this space,
Right.
literally for any of us, for most of us listening, what are what does it look like? I mean, what does this sector look like?
Yeah.
Is there like some main areas in which people are putting money? Like how do you approach this for the first time?
So historically, the one way that people could invest in the space industry was by buying satellite communications companies. So there were these big, the big four: Intelsat, SES, Eutelsat, Telesat. These were sort of the white-shoed companies of the industry. They'd typically have like 7 years of backlog, 85% EBITDA margins, throwing off, huge amounts of cash flow. And that's what people thought of when they thought of investing in the space industry.
Mm-hmm.
Beginning in the kind of 2010s, there was a new investable industry, which is the Earth observation industry. You might think of it as satellite imagery. Companies like Planet and Black Sky, Spire doing, weather satellites and whatnot. That had become fashionable. And I tell you what we're actually seeing now, are clearly the historic areas in launch and satellite manufacturing weren't things that you could invest in individually, because it was all done by big prime contractors, right? It was Lockheed and Boeing. So you wouldn't invest in them to invest in space. But you are now seeing these pure play companies like the Rocket Labs of the world, right, that give you a way to invest in the future space economy.
So are those companies are those publicly traded companies that you're talking about?
Yeah. These are the publicly traded.
Uh-huh.
The other thing that's pretty exciting, since I've been following the industry, like back in 2014, I think there were like 8 venture capital investments in space companies worldwide for like $150 million or something like that. Last year, there were, couple, I haven't totaled the numbers yet, but, couple hundred investments with, probably 4 billion-ish of venture raise. So the industry is seeing, or has seen for years, really going back to 2015 was the year when, you saw this sort of huge jump of enthusiasm and investment in the industry. And what was special about 2015, that was the year that both SpaceX and OneWeb announced that they were going to build these mega constellations. And this was really the first time since the 1990s that anybody tried to build anything other than satellites, way out in the geosynchronous orbit, right? That the traditional industry, you could put 3 satellites equally spaced around the Earth and cover the entire Earth. The idea of what Starlink and other constellations are doing, or these satellites are not 36,000 kilometers away. They're like 600 kilometers away or 300 kilometers away. So they're really close to the Earth, which means you can get much higher bandwidth. You can get a much lower latency. The problem is you just got to put a ton of them in orbit in order to cover the whole Earth.
Yeah. So is that kind of like the thing that I think, people in this space, where's somebody coming into this space for the first time is an analyst, like where would you direct them and say, you know what, these are the areas where we think there's going to be, steady but predictable growth, and then these
defense. Yeah.
Sure.
I mean, I hate to say it, right? Because this has been schmuck story forever, right? Is this whole industry is going to flip from being 80-20 government to eventually it's going to be 80-20 commercial. And I do think that that potential is there. I mean, it's happened in every other industry.
So when you're saying defense, like you're talking about private companies involved with defense?
Oh yeah. I mean, there are,
yeah,
there is this, I'm not making this up. There is a company that manufactures a satellite that's meant to go out into orbit to look at other satellites from other people. Like, this is a commercial company doing it. The name of the satellite is the Jackal. The name of the CEO is his nickname Jolly Rogers.
What's the company? What's the company name?
Well, you can figure it out. You're a Google search away.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, I'm going to Google it now, but
yeah.
Anyway, so
what I'm saying is you're seeing it with the Golden Dome, right? Holy crap, where did that come from? Like, I knew all about Star Wars and whatnot, but I didn't have that on my bingo card for this year.
The Golden Dome, tell us about that for those people who don't know.
Yeah, so back in January, Trump tweeted out, like, hey, I want a Golden Dome for missile defense, for the United States. Uh-huh. And so, I mean, if you're not aware of it, we have no way of defending against a mass attack of ballistic missiles. We have a small number of interceptors up in Alaska. Then I think they've probably failed like 7 out of 10 times they've tried. Uh-huh. So the idea is, Trump saw how successful, the Iron Dome is.
That's the Israelis.
The Israelis, and said, hey, give me one of those, but do it in space.
Uh-huh.
Which, I mean, I'm not going to, the big studies are coming out here in a matter of weeks, and we'll see. And I mean, famously, it was, Reagan's conception of the Star Wars program that drove the Soviets into bankruptcy as they tried to copy our technology, which even we couldn't do at the time. Yeah. Now, I'd tell you the question is, could we do it now? And the one big answer of maybe is, I'll give you an example. So when SpaceX announced that they were going to build this whole constellation back in 2015, Starlink, I wrote a piece at Raymond James, which somebody can probably go back and find, where I said, like, this is a stupid idea. Like, how could you possibly launch like 1,000 satellites a year or a couple thousand satellites a year and be profitable? And the answer is, like, we just ran the numbers on the Starlink, where we do an analysis. And if we're right, they will be the fastest company in history to achieve $10 billion of revenue, which they'll blow through this year at about $12.5 billion. Huh. And that's using 2019 as the starting date when they very first started launching satellites. Now, in part to get there, SpaceX has broken all of the rules, right, of satellite manufacturing. Now, this is not a fair equivalent, but one of the traditional satellite companies, Viasat, has spent the better part of a decade building a massive 6-ton satellite that was supposed to go out to geosynchronous orbit and provide a terabit per second of capacity. Well, it took them 8 years and about $850 million to build and launch that satellite, which when it launched, the antenna failed to deploy and they now only get 10% of the capacity they wanted. The point is, that is Viasat. That's the traditional way of doing things. SpaceX is telling us that when the new Starship rocket, the big one that gets caught by the chopsticks, when that thing starts launching, their plan is to build 30 to 40 satellites a week that do a terabit per second, and each one will cost like $1.5 million. Mm-hmm. Run that through your financial model.
Yeah, there you go. So that's great. So, okay, so let's talk about those companies that might seem, or those technologies that might seem right now like maybe a little riskier, but have the potential to, become huge wins. Like what industry is that, and who are some of the players there?
Well, oddly enough, what's old is new. Like the SATCOM industry, like
satellite communications,
right? These are the big four, the Intelsats and SESs of the world. Like this was the boring part of the industry. Well, it's gotten really interesting in the last couple of years as both, OneWeb and SpaceX have come into the market and really changed, the paradigm here. And soon enough, we've got Amazon, which has spent over $10 billion on their launch alone, right? They're starting to launch their constellation, call it mini Starlink. It's not mini, it's 3,600 satellites, but this is going to change the landscape. These systems at the sort of price points and capacity that I'm giving you, with the future Starlink system, will be sufficient that they can actually, not in urban areas, but certainly in ex-suburban and whatnot, they can compete with a cable operator or fiber offering gigabit per second speed, for the same sort of price you'd pay for a cable. So
When do you anticipate that'll happen?
well, on the Starlink side, it's entirely dependent on that new rocket, which was having a really good streak, and then it kind of blew up twice in a row.
Okay.
But they'll get it going, and our guess is, in our model, we really don't have it contributing into the end of next year in 2026. I think people have been more optimistic. I've been doing this for over 20 years. None of this. I mean, again, SpaceX has the ability to sort of change move the goalposts in ways that others can't. We saw the same thing with their flat panel antennas, right? Which, sort of a cult following of people out there with the little flat panels, and you see them all over on RVs and boats and cruise ships and whatnot. Back when they announced that they were going to do the Starlink system in 2015, at that point, there were probably hundreds, maybe thousands of flat panel antennas built in the world, and each one cost somewhere between hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars a piece, mostly for, naval tracking systems or aircraft antennas and whatnot. Last year, SpaceX built and sold, I think, 4.6 million antennas, and they sell them for what, $600 a pop?
So let me ask you this, though. SpaceX is obviously incredibly disruptive in many ways. I mean, and you just brought up like Starlink. Like, are these existential threats to other businesses? Like, I think about, like, if Starlink becomes like as fast as any, cable option, and people can also potentially use it for phones, are we talking about, the demise of...
You just touched on, this is not specific to Starlink, but there is the other big hot trend is this direct-to-device technology.
Right.
The idea that, just your unmodified handset, from whether it's Apple or it's Android, can suddenly talk to satellites, even though it wasn't necessarily designed to do that. And, the technology has been demonstrated. It seems like everybody has thrown their ring into the hat. Apple has now pumped like $1.7 billion into Globalstar to help them build more satellites for their direct-to-device service, their, text emergency. You've obviously got Starlink, teamed up with T-Mobile, and they had that $17 million, Super Bowl commercial, which followed the Super Bowl commercial last year with AT&T and Ben Stiller and AST, right? So like this stuff is moving outside of, the space industry, and it is now impacting, terrestrial wireless operators and the services that they provide. You're also seeing it impacting, as I said, in the future, there have been huge battles ongoing about broadband subsidies, right? And how they've been wasted. Well, the new FCC commissioner, Brendan Carr, is a big fan of saying, hey, let's find the cheapest way to give people connectivity, not necessarily make it a subsidy program for building infrastructure, right? But what that says is, hey, let's just subsidize a Starlink service instead of trying to build out, non-economical infrastructure, whether it's cable or fiber. So there will be impacts on industries outside of the space industry. I always used to say, satellite is the option of last resort. Like if you can't get, a fiber, a cable, a DSL, 2 cans and a string, well, you do SATCOM. Well, the world is changing where SATCOM in some scenarios is becoming the preferred.
Yeah, I would think that. In fact, especially if it becomes just as fast and if it's just as expensive or maybe not even that expensive, if you're doing, if Apple comes in and all of a sudden they're able to just say, you just need to buy a phone. That's all you need to do. You don't need a service anymore. You just go through the satellites. I mean, it almost seems inevitable that that's going to happen. And then you just look down the line and you say, well, who's the loser here? Well, probably, some of these, these companies like AT&T or, Verizon or whatever, who don't have necessarily, who are not driven just by devices, but by the service, right? I mean, what are those companies doing? I assume they're not just putting themselves in a situation like, a Polaroid camera or Kodak, I should say, and they're probably planning on this happening inevitably.
Yeah, so I think it's one of these situations where at this point, the concept of direct to device and the reality of it, right? I mean, Apple is offering the service. It's become so embedded that you would have to explain to your shareholders why you don't have a direct to device strategy, right?
Yeah.
We're at that point where everybody feels compelled to do it. Now, the bloody reality is like, we don't know whether this service can actually generate revenues or not. Whether people will flock to it, whether, is this the next iPhone or the next 3D TV? Where like, once they launch it, people are like, this sucks. I'm not going to pay for this ever.
It'll probably suck at the beginning. I mean, even right now, my phone, once in a while, when I go hiking, goes into some sort of like satellite, whatever. That doesn't work at all, right? I mean, it says satellite. It's a cool little satellite that it's on there, but it doesn't.
Because the Russians are jamming you.
Yeah. Well, maybe that's the case, but right now it's worthless. And for a period of time, I suspect it would be. But, a lot of this, stuff that we're really talking about is just, driving costs down, for some of the things that, we think is very expensive, like, all the stuff that's involving space, but not only that, but probably will drive down some of our communications prices and stuff like that.
Well, certainly. And we think there's a lot of elasticity of demand, that can happen. And we've seen it in the industry, right? I mean, it took 55 years from Sputnik to get the first 1,000 satellites on orbit. And SpaceX alone is now launching 2,000 a year, right?
Yeah.
And so there's this like Cambrian explosion of new companies that have popped up out there. And quite honestly, I'm kind of optimistic that there is, I'll call it a new space economy that we're seeing develop in the cislunar space. So this is kind of like not just communication services in Earth, but all the things happening all the way out to the moon. I mean, you've probably seen we've had like 3 or 4 commercial landers on the moon just in the last, 18 months. We've got 4 private space stations that are being built to replace the International Space Station. We've got, dozens of companies that are getting big government contract awards, again, back to the government, to build out capabilities in space like, orbital refueling and space situational awareness and communication systems. And the reason why, because the best, worst thing that's happened to the space industry in a long time is China, right? China is on the moon. They are now out scoping resource-rich places. They have a space station, so we will have a space station. And from a geopolitical perspective, that will probably continue to keep, driving the governments in that direction, even though, of course, Elon Musk yearns for Mars.
What is the role of, if any, I'm just thinking, how artificial intelligence in general has really affected so many different industries. How is it affecting this industry?
I think where we probably see it most evidently is in the Earth observation side. These are companies that take satellite imagery. And, in the old days, it was rolls of literally Kodak tape that would parachute back to Earth, and they'd catch them with an airplane, and then eventually it'd make to somebody's desk, and they'd look at the imagery under a microscope. Even when I started in this industry, you would literally have to burn, go to the robot would go to the tape reel and burn, a hard drive, which you would then FedEx to somebody to look at the imagery. And nowadays, not only is all this imagery coming off satellites and going directly into the cloud, but you're getting onboard processing where you're able to pre-process the images and, extract value or the most important value and transmit it quickly. And you think about what's happening in the battlefields of Ukraine. We have absolutely transformed. I mean, there is no such thing as camouflage. It does not exist anymore. It's only mobility. I mean, any Russian tank driver can tell you from the time he pulls into the tree line, he's got 20 minutes before precision fire is coming on him. And that stuff is happening because they used to call it machine learning. Now they call it AI, right?
Right. Yeah.
But it has become so powerful at its ability to do things like change detection and imagery detection, shapes and movements, that it is really extracting a ton more value out of the imagery that's always been there.
If you're an investor who's just kind of interested in getting exposure to all of this stuff, how do you recommend people do that? I mean, what was is there like a good ETF or something like that?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you don't have to, not to give investment advice, but just like what are the potential ways of exposure? Because there's people who are sitting out here thinking, well, I don't have millions of dollars to put into any of this, but
look, the good news is, right, there's a lot more choices to invest in. Like when Stupid ass Chris Quilty started covering the industry in the mid 2000s, there were like 7 companies I could write on. Maybe,
yeah.
Right. And now there's a wealth of them, and you can choose, individual stocks. You can choose, venture investment if you've got that open to you. Private equity has become very active in the space industry. The company Redwire, publicly listed $1 billion company, was a AE Industrial Partners roll-up. And we've got 2 IPOs in the space industry. They have just happened. Karman Space and Defense, which was a PE roll-up. And then you got Voyager, which has announced they're building one of the 4 space stations, with big contracts from NASA.
Yeah.
So there are a wealth of, I would say, things from, if you're from value to GARP to growth to frontier investment, it's all there.
Yeah. Where can we learn more about what you're doing there, Chris?
Our website, and we're just about to do a big refresh, but it's got information about us, and you can sign up we've got a newsletter that goes out every 2 weeks. We also have some complimentary, what we call quick takes. Get it? Quick takes.
Oh yeah. Okay. Got it.
Where, a couple times a week, we'll see news items where we have some commentary on it, and you can set up for alerts for that. But, visit back to the website, and later in the spring.
Website, Chris? What is it?
Quiltyspace.com.
Quilty Space. Got it.
Yep.
Very good. Well, it's been fun talking about this. Obviously, not something we tend to know very much. Our group doesn't tend to much talk about or anything like that, but it's good to just get some exposure on something new, and I appreciate your coming on.
Yeah, feel free to check back in. You'll see more space stuff in the news.
Be right back.
You make a lot of money but are still worried about retirement. Maybe you didn't start earning until your 30s and now you're trying to catch up. And meanwhile, you've got a mortgage and private school to pay for and you feel like you're getting farther and farther behind. Good news. If you need to catch up on retirement, check out a program put out by some of the oldest and most prestigious life insurance companies in the world. It's called Wealth Accelerator. It can help you amplify your returns quickly, protect your money from creditors, and provide financial protection to your family if something happens to you. The concepts here are used by some of the wealthiest families in the world, and there's no reason why they can't be used by you. Check it out for yourself by going to wealthformulabanking.com. Again, that's wealthformulabanking.com.
Welcome back to the show. Hope you enjoyed it. I know it was sort of an esoteric topic, but again, the goal for me here is to not just, listen to other podcasts and regurgitate what they're saying and not have anything interesting, but the goal is to try to expand out everybody's horizons, including mine, right? I'm constantly trying to learn, trying to figure out what's out there. It doesn't help to just, focus in the same ecosystem in order to do that. Of course, there remains the core principles of what I do, which is investing in real estate and that kind of thing. But you know what? I am all in when it comes to, making sure that I don't miss out on something. And I think a lot of people should be seeing as what happened with Bitcoin, for example. We're in a very, very interesting economy. We've got artificial intelligence going on. We've got space. We got Bitcoin. We got all sorts of stuff, and we have to take advantage of this, or at least the smart money will. That's it for me this week on Wealth Formula Podcast. Buck Joffrey here, signing off.